I'm convinced, is a religion on its own, a system of belief without legitimate evidence to back it up, which I would call materialism. And that's where me and inspiring philosophy kind of merge.
Materialism was the view of many scientists at the turn of the 20th century. This simplistic view that all that existed was matter and energy, and the rearrangements of it, is the extreme view of realism. Realism is a general belief accepted by many today, that a physical reality exists independent of observation. However, this realistic worldview was shaken with the advent of quantum mechanics. The realization of how the quantum world behaved began to eat away at the materialist and realist beliefs.
But even Einstein was surpassed by the creation of quantum physics during the early 20th century. And how did Albert Einstein, a genius among men during his time, react to the implications of quantum physics? Well, he reacted like a closed-minded, dogmatic person, almost in a religious way, because of his unwillingness to accept new empirical evidence.
A good question to start. By the way, what is your name, if you don't mind giving your name out?
Yeah, I tell everyone my first name. It's Mike. That's generally what I go by. Everyone just calls me IP.
Okay, cool. I'll call you Mike. Mike, so I guess a good place to start is, why should people question materialism?
Well, it's been essentially dead for about almost a century at this point. I mean, this is something that Richard Kahn Henry, the physicist, and Stephen Palmquist pointed out in a paper a while back, is that, it was built on this underlying idea that of what Democritus, the ancient Greek philosopher, said millennia ago, that there is nothing but atoms in the void, nothing but tiny particles and space, and everything is built up upon that. And when quantum physics came onto the scene, it really threw all that on its head. It turned everything upside down. And Werner Heisenberg went on to say that he had basically said that science has decided on the side of Plato at this point. The smallest things are not these tiny atoms that bump around and that's all that is out there. It's built upon these possibilities, these mathematical possibilities of what could be actual. So it's kind of pushed now by a lot of materialists as like the foundation of all science, but it's really been struggling for almost a century at this point, and I can't understand why anyone would still consider it a competing philosophical view of the world.
Well, I think part of the reason it's so dominant is because it's difficult to deny the material world. It's so in our faces. You walk outside and there's the nice solid ground on your feet. There's the wind touching your skin. There's the feeling of, the warm sun on you. It's materialism is so easy a belief system to adopt because it's in our five-sense reality, where humans can pretty much only sense things through five senses, at least generally. It's so difficult to deny materialism. So that's one of the reasons why it's so pervasive, because, and it's not like you and I are trying to say the material world doesn't exist. It's there, at least in one respect it's there, but to believe that that's all there is, I think that's the flaw. I think that's where you and I are coming from. Is that an accurate statement?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm not in all denying that there's something we're experiencing, some objective reality we're experiencing out there. We would agree that the idea that that's all there is it's not scientifically backed at this point.
Well, one of the things that always baffles me, one of the ways that I go about debunking materialism is the causality problem, the old something from nothing problem. So, if we take materialism's word for it, then we live in a purely material world bound by purely causal mechanistic processes. So we have cause and effect. Drop a ball off the edge of a roof, it fell down because there was gravity pulling it down, a certain amount of wind resistance was maybe slowing down its fall, etc., etc. These processes, material processes really, mechanistic causal processes, but if you follow that logic all the way down, you end up being forced to ask a very simple yet important question, which is, well, I guess the question is, how does something come from nothing? If everything in the universe requires a mechanistic causal explanation for how it existed, you have to have a cause and effect relationship. for everything, I mean, this is what science-materialism puts forward, then you would have to have an explanation for how the universe began in the first place. And what scientists put forth a lot, or materialism/science, whatever you want to call it, they put forth, the Big Bang Theory. And there's two general versions I'll explain briefly for the audience. One version of the Big Bang Theory is that the universe always existed, and the other version is that the universe kind of came out of nothing. But both are contradictions. The idea that the universe always existed is a contradiction by materialism's standards, by the way. I mean, it may not actually be a contradiction, but by the very deep demands of materialism, it's a contradiction. The universe always existed. That means it didn't have an actual original cause. Because if it always existed, then there was no cause for it. There may have been a cause, but even if there was a cause for the universe, like the Big Bang, you still have to ask the question, what caused the thing that caused the Big Bang, and what caused the thing that caused the thing that caused the Big Bang, and on and on and on into an infinite regression. Mm-hmm. And this is something that, this is not like me saying this or you saying this. This is in the very logical demands of materialism. I said a moment ago, materialism is putting forth the view that everything in our reality, all matter, events, and energy must be bound by mechanistic causal explanations. And I'm not trying to explain this to you, Mike. I'm actually just trying to generalize this for the audience real quick. Okay. If all matter, energy, and events in the universe have to be bound by a mechanistic causal explanation, then so does the origins of the universe. And the mandate that everything must have a mechanistic causal explanation rules out the possibility of there actually being a mechanistic causal explanation for the universe itself. The reason for that being is, even when you think you found the original cause for the universe, by the very mandates of materialism, there had to have been a cause before that, and a cause before that. And you can't actually have an original cause. So causality, in and of itself, doesn't actually provide full, seamless, perfectly consistent answers for our reality. So I just wanted to really get that out there, because I think that's really important. Do you have anything to throw on top of that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that. It's, I remember watching a short 6-minute video on the Big Bang one time, and they were literally arguing that, of course, something can come from nothing, because outside of the universe, logic doesn't apply, causality wouldn't apply. And I'm trying to wrap my head around how they could even say that. How can you make a logical argument that nothing can come from nothing while denying the tenets of logic? Like, if you're going to try to make a logical argument to say that logic doesn't work in some places, you're using logic. You're using, the tenets of causality and logic. Their own arguments would contradict them in that setting.
It's funny. It's almost like these materialists will resort to the same, quote unquote, that they bash religious people for, utilizing in their arguments, and yet it seems like science a lot of times nowadays is using hocus pocus too. I mean, I'll give you one example, and I'm sure you have a lot to say on this one. Lawrence Krauss, theoretical physicist, tries to put forth the argument that something can come from nothing, and he says he has proof, scientific proof. I read his book, and he says something can come from nothing. But all he did was redefine nothing to mean something. So he still didn't solve the something from nothing problem. He just redefined nothing to mean something. And even worse, Lawrence Krauss promotes this idea of something called an uncaused event or particle. An uncaused event or particle, he says, are at a fundamental level in reality, there's these things called quantum fluctuations, and from those fluctuations there are quantum events, uncaused events / uncaused particles. Now think for a moment what that means. An uncaused event is an occurrence without evidence for how it occurred. It's an event without evidence for how it occurred, because it was uncaused. It didn't have a prior cause. Now, by every mainstream materialist scientific standard of the past many, many decades, probably centuries, that claim that Lawrence Krauss is putting forth, that there's such a thing as uncaused events / particles, that would be called magic, hocus pocus, pseudoscience, bullcrap by most mainstream materialist science, and not even science, at least a theoretical physicist who's very popular and is constantly debating theologians, Lawrence Krauss. he himself is now putting forth a very hocus-pocus theory that seems to go against all belief systems that define materialism.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And if you, the physicist Don Page, he actually wrote a review of Lawrence Krauss's book, and he gave it 2 stars, and he basically pointed out everything you said. It's a redefining terms, and it's, in my opinion, I think he has bit off more than he can chew, because in saying that the universe came from these quantum fluctuations, you know, that doesn't sound very materialistic to me. That sounds more, you know, towards the idealistic perspective.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And that's kind of the weird thing that seems to be happening in the very cutting edges of science. Because really what I believe, my belief is that, you know, science, with quantum physics, for example, science peered through their microscopes. They peered so deeply into the fabric of the cosmos. They peered so deep down into the fundamentals of how our universe operates that they found God staring right back at them through the microscope, which is kind of very, very ironic. And when I say God, I don't mean like a specific theological God. I mean like a general kind of woo-woo New Age, you know, we're all one kind of God. That's kind of like the belief system I'm coming from. But so it seems like science has stumbled upon, you know, implications about our universe at the most fundamental level, and in science's, you know, desperate scramble to find answers to our universe.
Oh yeah, I completely agree, and I think the deeper we go, there's a good quote from Isaac Newton that says he has dipped his little toe in the ocean of knowledge, and where we will, I'm paraphrasing of course, but where we will go, it will take us to unimaginable heights and depth.
Fascinating. You know, and by the way, if I go silent for like 10, 15 seconds, I always tell my guests this. It's totally normal. I think silence is an important part of a conversation. You just got to shut up. So don't worry. Just if I go silent 15 seconds, it's normal.
No worries.
Yeah. You know, it's sad because it seems like this. And was it Newton you just quoted?
Yes, Isaac Newton.
Or paraphrase. Yeah. But you know, a lot of people call the modern, you know, that the view that the universe is like a giant clock. A lot of people say that is like the Newtonian model, but you know, we have this view that, you know, truth is found in mechanistic relationships between bits of matter and energy. That's been the very dominant, that's kind of like a derivative of materialism. That's kind of like implied in it, is that because the ultimate truth, the ultimate standard of truth is physical matter. Matter exists objectively. It's there whether or not we're looking at it. Because so much emphasis is placed on the physical world, I think it kind of deadens people's souls. And if soul is too much of a spiritual term for some in the audience, and it deadens people's sense of purpose. Because, and that's what I really think this comes down to, that when we believe in a purely material world, materialism is all about the objective. It's all about there's an objective reality, and this objective reality is the ultimate standard of truth, and your subjective reality, things like purpose and imagination, passions, desires, things that are personal to you, those are secondary to the physical matter reality outside of you. And I think that when physical matter is put on a pedestal above the things that humans care about subjectively, I think it kills people's souls. It kills your sense of meaning. It turns us into robots. And, you know, maybe some people, if you want to get conspiracy theorists, you know, some people might say that that's kind of part of the overall machine that we're in nowadays, that we live in a world where, you know, disempowerment is the theme of the age. It seems like keeping people down, keeping people stunted is like the default kind of go-to thing nowadays. And when you believe that we live in a purely material world, I think a lot of times that actually encourages people to want to use and manipulate others, because hey, they're just physical pieces of matter to be manipulated for your will. So that's another conversation, maybe not. But yeah, I mean, and I'm not exactly sure what you specialize in with your channel, but do you have any opinions on like what I was just saying about meaning and purpose in people's lives, and how maybe materialism kind of puts meaning and subjective qualities like on the back seat?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's probably one of the most dangerous views out there. The implications are staggering. I think
Oh
philosophers
yeah.
like Bertrand Russell really pointed it out. I mean, he basically said I can't remember the exact quote, but he wrote a paper and he said, we're the products of, blind chances on a backwater planet somewhere. And, all of our hopes and dreams are destined to die in the void of the universe. And if you really take that to the logical conclusions, that's what you come to. There's no meaning. And in fact, I did a video recently called "The Benefits of Believing in Free Will," where there was a bunch of studies done on the effects of looking at if you have this belief in this deterministic world, it actually can, it can decrease moral behavior. It can actually be, dangerously and has dangerous effects that they can actually, do studies on and see now.
That is fascinating. We live in this world where, and hey, here in the West, materialism really is probably, I don't know the statistics of people's belief systems, but it's very prominent. Believing we live in a purely material world. And you know what? Maybe we could argue that the effects of believing in a purely material world are manifesting all around us. How about plastic surgery, for example? You've got people who, will cut their faces apart to preserve a natural sense of youth because they believe that the physical bits of matter that they think defines them is all there is in the world. So you naturally scramble to try to preserve your youth because you think you're totally identified with the matter that defines you, when maybe there might be something deeper. We can keep going. Another idea pops in my head. Let's see if I can grab it. Well, how about just a general obsession with materialism in general? People thinking that they have to accumulate a bunch of wealth. When you believe that you're nothing but matter, you're probably going to start worshiping matter. So people are very materialistic. Got to get the shiny car. Got to get the overpriced purse. Got to hoard the wealth. Like ancient emperors in Egypt who had to go buried into the tomb with all their treasures because they thought they could take it with them to the afterlife. Yeah, it is staggering to think about how a belief in a purely material world can totally devastate people's the way they live their lives. Any other thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, you also will see that in in some I guess religious communities as well with these faith preachers. I've actually have had the unfortunate experience of having to spend some time around them but their view of the afterlife is just this material paradise where they're going to go and they're going to have these mansions and they're going to have I've heard them say, depending on how many souls you save, that's how much wealth you'll have in heaven. And I'm dumbfounded by their materialistic, childish view of what the afterlife would be like. And but yeah, it all comes back to that philosophy. And if you would trace where a lot of these faith preachers get their ideas from Essex W. Kenyon or Kenneth Hagin, you'll get, they're coming from these materialistic ideas and these weird ideas where they're just obsessed with material wealth, and you see it everywhere in culture, not just in just what we would commonly think of materialists, but that materialist philosophy has spread into other different views of reality, like these religious groups that the faith preachers of that sort.
Yeah, that is a very, very good point. Yeah, it's funny. I was raised very loosely by Catholics, and yeah, heaven was always portrayed as the paradise where, I once had a friend who was a Christian, and he would tell me, he's like, man, heaven's going to be so great, man. He was telling me that in heaven, there's probably a million different versions of what happens in the afterlife, according to Christians anyways. But he was telling me that what he read was that, in the afterlife, in heaven, he's going to have an ideal body, so he's going to be totally, shredded and ripped, and he's going to be the most handsome person in the afterlife. It's going to be all, yeah. So it's just, yeah, it's true. And, I don't want to pose this question because it might lead us down a totally different rabbit hole, but yeah, let me keep that out of this convo. But, okay, so, one of the things I really liked about one of your videos, which I think is called Physics Debunks Materialism, is that the one?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, Yes, yes. Yeah, I think that's one of your most popular videos. It's got like 200 some thousand views.
About 125,000.
Nice, nice. So yeah, what I really liked about that video is that you really just pile on the evidence. You kind of just like you just stack it on to people, and you just crush their consciousness with just all the kind of quantum physics experiments, and then the experiments that eventually a few decades later that further reinforce that. And I think we should definitely focus a little bit of our time on the science that debunks materialism, paradoxically, ironically. So, like, I guess, are there any experiments from quantum physics or science in general, I guess, that you think are the most important with debunking materialism? And could you elaborate on those a little bit?
Sure, yeah, there's so many, and in fact, that video, I had to pick the ones I wanted to put in because there were so many more I could have put in. Like, people don't
Right.
realize that, like, they thought I was just selecting experiments, and yeah, I was, but there was even more I could have put in to support that. But I think
Right.
one of the biggest experiments, which I'm constantly putting in my videos, is the confirmation of the Cauchy-Spector theorem. And to simplify what this means is, it basically says that non-contextuality is incompatible with quantum mechanics. So what it basically means is if we're looking, like, let's say nature is like a stage. The materialists would say we're passive observers of nature. We're constantly just observing things as they go by. We have no active role in it. And the Cauchy-Spector theorem directly contradicts that idea. It says that what we put into nature will determine or will help participate in the outcomes decided. So what we choose to put into nature is going to directly decide outcomes. So this idea that we're just going to be passive observers, we're just, part of the mechanistic clock, has been completely and totally debunked. And the Cauchy-Spector theorem is a prime example of that. This was only a theorem up until 2011 when Anton Zeilinger and his team confirmed it. And they found, they directly confirmed it. And to quote Anton Zeilinger, the physicist, to quote him directly, he says, we are not just passive observers. I mean, that's a direct quote from him. So, he's said, he would say that what we perceive as reality now depends on our earlier decision of what to measure. So, in other words, to paraphrase him, what we decide to do determines what's going to happen later. And there's
Right.
that's directly a contradiction of the materialist view. And another good one is, of course, the violation of Bell's inequality in 1982, and then later, to add on to that, the violation of Leggett's inequality. And so this was basically looking for for hidden variables, or either in local hidden variables in Bell's or in non-local hidden variables in Leggett's. And so what they were trying to see was, well, maybe it's not really, as the early founders of quantum mechanics were saying, that our choices of how to measure is determining the outcome. Maybe there are these hidden variables that are actually doing it for us, and we're just being tricked. This is what Einstein thought. He started to posit the hidden variable theories, and all these hidden variables have been ruled out. The loopholes have been closed one after another. First with Bell's, then with Leggett's, and then the Cauchy-Spector theorem again. So I mean, it just keeps adding on, and you saw people with Bell's inequality try to get around that with like the non-local hidden variables. In fact, if you read Paul Davies' book, I think it's the Ghost in the Atom, he actually interviews John Bell, and John Bell in the early or in the late 80s was saying, well, maybe there are non-local hidden variables, and if he would have lived to have seen the violation of Leggett's inequality, he would have seen those have also been falsified. So it just seems like every time they try to escape to the well, maybe it's this, then well, nope, that gets falsified. Well, maybe it's this, well, that gets falsified as well. So they just so now you see people trying to escape to the many worlds interpretation. So the video I'm currently working on is going to be a critique of that, and to show that it's not actually a competing theory right now. There's actually a lot of problems, and it's actually very incomplete in a lot of ways.
Yeah, quantum physics has been retested more than probably any other frickin', realm of science ever. It's especially like the double slit experiment, for example. That thing has been redone so many times. Like in any other experiment, science would have been content after a few experiments, compared to how many times the the double slit experiment has been redone. It's been redone over and over and over again, beyond any normal standard of empiricism that science would apply to experiments in order to determine whether or not the results were true. They have added an unprecedented level of skepticism and scrutiny to this experiment in specific, and probably a lot of others in quantum physics, but from what I know from this one, they add all that extra skepticism because the implications of it contradict their materialist worldview. Now, a moment ago you mentioned, one of the first things you mentioned as proof against materialism, what was it? Nature's something? It was kind of a big word. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, what is it?
The Coach-Inspector theorem?
Coach-Inspector theorem, okay. Right, well, it's funny because, when you think about it, I mean, the idea that, we as conscious actors, conscious observers, affect the physical world, well, I mean, when you think about it, if I were to, with my hand, I don't know, knock on the wall next to me, my hand knocking on the wall, affecting physical reality, was first a byproduct of thoughts in my mind. And some scientists could say, oh yeah, well the thoughts are just neural firings of chemical things in your brain. Okay, fair enough. But it seems like there's a bridge point between thoughts and consciousness. And so you have this consciousness thing. So my consciousness was the precursor to thoughts, was the precursor to my hand moving and then knocking the wall, affecting physical matter. I mean, if that's not a kind of anecdotal piece of evidence kind of proving that the immaterial can affect the material, I'm not really sure what is. Now, of course, the scientists will kind of, they'll wash that away by saying that, consciousness is just a byproduct of physical matter. But anyways, I just wanted to throw that in there. But yeah, man, it's just crazy. It's crazy.
What's
and
interesting?
Okay, so here, yes, go ahead if you have anything to add.
There's actually some research I've been getting into. I'm probably going to do a video on it in November, but there's actually a lot of neuroscientific research out right now. A lot done by neuroscientist Jeffrey Schwartz, who talks about the power of mental focusing, and he's actually showing that through brain scans on OCD patients, you can actually change the chemical makeup of your brain through mental focusing. And I've heard materialists say, well, that's just one scientist, one study. Well, no, it's actually several studies into neuroplasticity. And there's actually several showing the power of mental focusing at this point, that we can actually, through our own thoughts and our own efforts, can change the chemical makeup of our brain.
Oh my God, it's nuts. I mean, have you read the book, The Brain That Changes Itself?
No, I haven't, but I do want to now.
Oh, it's incredible. It's all about neuroplasticity. It is like, it basically sums up like all the prominent studies in recent years showing how conscious intent really molds and shapes the brain. The book is beyond mind-blowing. It's like, holy crap. It really makes you feel like you're in control of even your physical body. And hey, that's what the placebo effect is when you think about it. I mean, the placebo effect, if that's not proof that there's something going on in our universe, I don't know what is. Because, I mean, the placebo effect is literally your thoughts affecting the physical body. I mean, and, for any viewers who aren't familiar with the placebo effect, you got somebody sick in the hospital, maybe with cancer. The doctor gives them a sugar pill, but the doctor tells them it's a cure. The patient takes it, and because they believed it was a cure, they're cured. And this placebo effect is so documented that you can't even get prescription medications. A lot of types of medications, you cannot get them FDA approved if you don't have them like double-blind studies, triple-blind studies to make sure the placebo effect isn't having an effect. So that's kind of like another kind of interesting way to prove that the immaterial thoughts, though scientists would say that is material, but can affect the physical world. But, hey, another good example of what you were just saying, that study, it's prescription medication in general. Okay, so my thoughts can absolutely affect my neural brain chemistry. If a depressed person, a lot of times, really what they're suffering from is a negative outlook, negative perspectives. If I were to, I mean, I can literally generate happiness. I can literally sit here, and I think anyone can do this. You can just start generating happiness. You can just focus your brain, and you can start generating happiness. It's possible. You can generate sadness, depending on where you focus your your intention. These things are literally affecting, and then this is kind of the tragic things that materialism, the materialistic worldview that we're just purely matter, has justified a lot of these prescription medications that, for depression, for anti-anxiety, that come with all these side effects and don't address the root problem, but simply try to rearrange your brain chemistry and the supposed chemical imbalance in order to solve the problem. Because when you believe we're just purely material beings bound of matter, little particles, naturally that justifies the whole chemical imbalance. There's just there's a physical problem in your brain. It's not your outlook. It's not your interpretations of events. It's not, the lifestyle choices you make. It's that you are flawed inherently biologically on a material level, and then that justifies take a pill and don't worry about the deeper thought, consciousness, habits that you have that lead to depression and anxiety. Just take the pill. It'll alter the brain chemistry, and that's the best that the Western materialistic medicine can provide us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I was on Zoloft because I suffered from major depressive disorder for a while, and it just made me more depressed. When I got a hold of Jeffrey Schwartz's work, that's when I really started to get over my depression, because I just started to, as my boss would say, suck it up, cupcake, and I would start saying, you know what, I'm not going to be depressed anymore. I'm going to fight against this. And coupled with that, with just changing my diet a little bit and trying to be a healthier and happier person, it really had much more effects than any kind of Zoloft would ever do on me. And I'm not going to tell people to stop taking antidepressants because I'm not a doctor, but I can, from my experiences alone, it made me worse. It did not help me at all. It also created other side effects, which I don't want to go into because I just didn't. I don't know what it did to me. I got off it after the first month, and I've never been on, and I just it was terrible.
The horror stories regarding people who take antidepressants, anti-anxiety are horrifying. I've heard so many terrible things. A lot of people take it and they just go even worse into depression. And one of the reasons for that might be that, and I think this is the reason that a lot of times it backfires, is probably because you still haven't really addressed the root problem. Now, yeah, there could be other things like the chemicals itself screwed you up physically, which is totally possible. But yeah, I mean, you're not getting to the root problem. You're just not getting to the root problem. And the sad thing is that science likes to, let me be clear, like scientific materialism is probably the more accurate term of what you and I are trying to go after here. Materialism is a real thing. Materialism and science in general have a tendency to, it demands causality, it demands cause and effect in all the explanations, but it usually stops asking that question when it becomes inconvenient. So yeah, we need causality, mechanistic cause and effect explanations for everything in the universe, but don't ask it about the Big Bang because that really provokes too many logical contradictions. And then another convenient thing is with Western medicine, oh yeah, it's a chemical imbalance in your brain that's causing depression. It's caused by, maybe serotonin reuptake inhibitors, so you got to take some SSRIs, and then that'll change the chemistry here, the chemistry there, and then that'll fix the chemical imbalance. But no one asks, where does the chemical imbalance come from? The Western medicine approaches ask mechanistic causal questions about the brain, but don't ask too many, and don't ask past the wall of chemical imbalance. That's as far as they want you to go. It's just a chemical imbalance. Now take the medication, and that'll fix the thing. You'll be on pills for the rest of your life. Awesome. And so it's frustrating to see how a lot of scientific materialists will demand materialism and demand that you have mechanistic causal explanations, but when it becomes inconvenient and you get too deep, when you ask why too much, then they tell you stop asking the question.
Oh yeah, and that's exactly what Jeffrey Schwartz was saying in his book, The Mind and the Brain. It's, he presents all this research on neuroplasticity and his research on OCD patients and among other research of people, who've been doing the same thing. And he says he encounters the exact same opposition to it. It's all about, as Henry Stapp says, it's all about metaphysical prejudice.
I like that word.
Yeah.
Well, we got about 20 minutes, so let me ask you this. I'm pretty sure you're okay with being open about this, but I don't know if you don't want to talk about it, you don't have to. I think at the end of one of your videos, you kind of plant a seed relating to some of your theological beliefs. Mm-hmm. Do you have any? I want to be clear. Do you have any? And if so, what are those background beliefs?
Well, I am a Christian. That is the main purpose of my channel, is to promote Christian ideas and defend Christian beliefs.
Okay, good. Yeah, so it's very strange where one can find intellectual allies. I'm the kind of person who hates religion. I think that for the most part, believing in Christianity, but believing in most religions is silly nonsense. And I used to have a friend who was a Christian. Maybe he was getting his information from like terrible sources. But I spent years talking to that guy. I heard all the supposed, the apologetics, debating points, and ultimately it never really fulfilled me, and it never really convinced me. Nonetheless, I do find it interesting how, in spite of you and I having different worldviews or belief systems, whatever you want to call it, we do agree on this problem with materialism. I don't want to get into like a theological debate, but I
think we would probably agree on more than we disagree. I mean, I'm not a fundamentalist like American type Christian. The more I study early church fathers, Greek Orthodox, the more I get closer to what I would call Palamite panentheism. And in fact, I did a past video on this where I basically say I'm a Christian panentheist.
Do you believe in the whole Christ story?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay. Okay, so see, that's the funny thing. That's the bizarre thing. Is that, yeah, I mean, there's so many branches of every religion. A lot of religions have been distorted. There's obviously a lot of preachers, as we mentioned earlier, who preach what you would say is the wrong message, heaven being a frickin', ghetto paradise or, whatever. And, we have, it's just so many subsects of religions. And this is one thing that I've noticed a lot, is that the word Christian is too vague of a term to apply to every Christian, because some people like yourself, you had a very specific term for the kind of Christian you are. Very briefly, what distinguishes your Christian viewpoints from like the mainstream American Christian belief system?
I think it would be a lot of different things. A lot of things I disagree with. A lot of like the average mainstream Christian. For example, I'm not a young Earth creationist. I'm not a dualist. I consider myself a monistic idealist. I would call myself a weak panentheist. And then most importantly, I would consider myself what the term is a post-millennialist. So I don't believe that there's going to be this antichrist and this tribulation and the rapture and all this other weird nonsense that was pretty much made up in the 1800s. In fact, if you go back to a lot of the early church fathers, even like to Martin Luther, they didn't believe in any of that nonsense. But a post-millennialist would believe that our job here as Christians is to make the world a better place. When Jesus gave the Great Commission, he said, go out and make disciples. Go out and feed my sheep. Go out and take care of the poor. And their first answer was, well, when are you going to restore the kingdom of the kingdom of Israel? And he said, it's not for you to concern that. Go out and be worried about the Great Commission. So a post-millennialist argues that that our job is to make the world a better place, and eventually the world is just going to keep getting better. The more we work towards it, the more we take care of the poor, the more we teach, the more we help each other, and eventually we'll create this millennial kingdom that where people will live in harmony, there will be no more wars, and that will be the future millennial kingdom. And see, I think this American Christian view of like this Antichrist and rapture and all that, it directly contradicts what Jesus taught and what we're supposed to do. And it directly contradicts most of what church theologians up until about the 1800s taught, outside of America, of course. But so the more I study the works of the past theologians and the early church fathers, the more I'm convinced this faith, this prosperity gospel nonsense, this rapture nonsense that's taught in America is just completely false, completely distorted from what Christ originally taught. So I mean, there's a whole lot that would probably distinguish me in my views from what the average American Christian would view. I mean, my biggest point being is that stop trying to figure out when this rapture myth is going to come up and start worrying about taking care of people.
Wow, that's a gigantic distinction from the mainstream American fast food Christianity. Wow. That's it, and that's what I really find fascinating is, how much people really have in common when you strip away all the bureaucratic bullcrap that has been piled onto a lot of belief systems. It's great to see that. I really can't say I disagree with much of what you said there when in terms of your background views. The idea of let's stop war, let's kind of promote the message of Jesus, let's be kind, help the poor, etc. By the way, are you against homosexuals? I'm curious if that's part of your views.
I would be in the camp of N.T. Wright at this point. He's a biblical scholar of the Anglican Church, which means we are undecided. I don't see any harm in it, and a lot of Christians would be surprised that the New Testament is not as clear as they tend to think it is. And this is what N.T. Wright points. I mean, he says to really make a coherent argument would probably take, as he says, like a 700-page book, because it's, in the ancient world they didn't really encounter homosexual marriage. It just didn't happen. It was very much based around this idea that you have to produce offspring. Augustus Caesar would fine widows if they weren't remarried after 2 years because that was the culture. You were meant to keep producing children to support the family. So I mean, it's really hard to say. And what I usually will say to Christians when they get all upset about homosexual marriage is that sexual sin is not going to separate us from God in any way that King David's polygamy was going to separate him from God. King David was in the Bible was called a man after God's own heart, and he was rampant in sexual sin, just rampant. And he had so many wives, he was constantly cheating, and he's called a man after God's own heart. So this idea that if you're homosexual, you can't have a relationship with God, you can't, grow close to God, it's based on this weird interpretation that just doesn't make any sense. So even if homosexuality is a sin, I'm undecided, it's not going to separate you from God. It's not going to separate, you from Christ in any way. And I think this stupid mentality among Christians that you have to be perfect before you can come to God is just completely contradiction to the gospel. Jesus said, I've came to be with the sick. I've came for them. I didn't come for perfect people.
Yeah, I mean, that's quite the elitist mentality to have, it seems to me. And I don't know how the mainstream fast food, Christianity can get away with it, because on one level they always talk about Christ consciousness and how he was such a great, spiritual being, and he cared about the poor, and yet, so often, like for example, like the Republican Christian political, group here in America, they're always so pro-capitalism, pro-free market, pro-survival of the fittest, weed out the weak. So it's always this cognitive dissonance, and it really makes me wonder where the heck is all this coming from? Where is all this cognitive dissonance coming from? Do you think that maybe a belief in a purely material world, i.e. materialism, is responsible
I think
for
in a
all
sense,
these perversions?
I think Descartes' dualism is directly responsible. Descartes,
Yes.
famous philosopher, very intelligent. Um, he said that, humans have souls, and then the material universe exists, substance dualism. Animals don't have souls, and then from his philosophy, you had the ideas going out that we are these souls that are in this world that we can dominate and take control. And, you kind of can, I'm not an expert on this, but I can kind of draw connections from like imperialism and capitalism, or I guess crony capitalism, back to this idea that
Yeah.
we're these souls, we're going to dominate this world out here, and then we're going to leave and go to heaven somewhere else. And who cares what happens? Jesus is going to come back and destroy it all, and who cares? Woo, party. And I think, you go back before Descartes to like Thomas Aquinas, St. Augustine, they were not teaching these dualistic ideas. They were teaching, the unity of man, these monistic ideas. And most scholars, surprisingly, overwhelmingly, would say that the Old Testament and the New Testament teaches a monistic view of man, that you're not a soul and a body. You're a soul, and you have a formal distinction with your body, I guess you could say. So I would say it's kind of like, I would not directly blame materialism. I would blame the idea of what materialism also came out of, starting with Descartes, this dualistic idea and everything.
Wow, that is awesome. Yes, I have heard, so dualism, really what it seems to be is that dualism is it's kind of like the belief that there's a divide in reality, that there's like a separation, and that kind of dualistic separation is definitely evident in the materialistic view of reality, or the objective versus subjective view of reality, that there's this material world separate from you, and then there's you. And I have heard about this whole what is it called, monism?
Monism, it's the opposite of dualism. It's the idea there's one substance. Dualism, the idea there's two substances. So physicalism would be a monism, and idealism would be monism.
Yes. Yeah, and monism, there's what's it called? There's a book called The Tao of Physics. It was written, I think, in the 70s, and it was an attempt to bridge ancient Eastern philosophical teachings, spiritual teachings, with the implications of modern physics. And monism, that was definitely one of the things they talked about. It seems like that is one of the big things, one of the big paradigm shifts that I've been kind of coming up onto the precipice of. Is my whole life I was raised with the view of this separatist kind of view of reality, that I'm kind of separate from others. What you mentioned earlier, that animals like have souls, or that they're somehow like of a different caliber than we humans, or this general view in general that there's a material world and that's kind of objective, and that is the ultimate standard of truth, and then you're kind of like separate from that, at least your conscious experiences. But more and more, I think the real paradigm shift, at least for me, is stepping into holism, or monism, whatever the hell you want to call it, stepping into a different state of consciousness and perspective where you believe that you're kind of part of everything. You're not separate from the world around you. You're a part of the world around you, and that's kind of like what monism puts forth. Like you said, it's one substance. It's all one, and that's kind of like that cliched woo-woo New Age thing you hear a lot, is we're all one. Real quick,
Yeah, well, Jesus said that in John 17:22. They may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you.
Wow, there it is. There it is. Fascinating. Absolutely freaking fascinating. Real quick, how much time you got left now?
I got about 10-15 minutes.
Okay, very cool. Yeah. So it's fascinating. What do they say? Many paths, one God, or many paths, one truth. This is what I see happening. With a lot of these little kind of not too popular yet, but slowly growing ideologies out there. Whether it's like the New Age movement, which has probably been commercialized to hell significantly. But, you got the New Age movement, and then you got you, who, I really can't say I find a disagreement with your Christian views yet. What was the specific name you called yourself? A pantheon Christian?
I call myself a weak panentheist, or I call myself a Palamite panentheist, named after the 12th century theologian Gregory Palamas. Callistos, where he's in the Greek Orthodox Church, he came up with the term for Palamite panentheism. So we would say, yeah, we're all one, but there's a formal distinction in there, in a sense.
Is that formal distinction like a temporary illusion, and that fundamentally we're all one, but temporary form we have these kind of distinctions, or you know, because that's a very common like Buddhist or Hindu kind of view. Does that apply?
Well, it in a sense does. I mean, C.S. Lewis would have said, I believe he said in Mere Christianity, that we are one with God, but we're also distinct in ourselves. So, I mean, this is also, I was watching a video today of Howard Storm, who had a near-death experience, also was saying the same things. He's a Christian now. You know, that we are, in a sense, as Howard Storm was putting it, we are in a sense, you know, distinct now, but we're all connected in some way. You know, it's.
Is that what the afterlife is?
What was
Do you
that?
think the afterlife is? Do you think that the afterlife is returning to the source, or returning to
Absolutely.
oneness?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Howard Storm on that. That, you know, the afterlife is journeying back to the one who is God. As you know, as Deuteronomy 6:4 says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." So we are returning back to the one who the ancient Israel's called. They called him the one.
Frickin' fact. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what I believe too. I believe that for both intuitive and law reasons. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and it's almost becoming cliched. We hear that nowadays in certain circles, anyways. The whole we're one thing, you hear it everywhere, and that really does to me to be the real distinction in almost every intellectual you know, field, or whether it's like science or religious debates, even like politics and how government should run. For me, it's about trying to find this holistic balance between you and the self-interest of those around you that you are connected with. Well, let me ask you, was there any specific that you to talk about or mention, or any other key points that you think are important for any skeptics who might be listening in the audience?
This objection I get to the whole quantum physics argument is that, well, you know, we can separate the macro world, the world of what we experience, with these subatomic particles. You know, they're kind of separate, you know, but we live in this macro world, and that line is becoming very, very much blurred. I mean, I just found a study. One of my viewers gave me a study the other day where, you know, they're doing double slit experiments with, you know, larger and larger molecules. I think the largest one now is a molecule of 810 atoms. And, you know, they're also talking about finding ways to do a double slit experiment with like mid-sized proteins or viruses at this point. And, you know, it's getting much harder, to separate the macro world from the quantum world. So this idea that, you know, we're somehow separate in this macro deterministic world, it's just completely getting buried on all sides of it at this point. And then there's the other idea, well, yeah, but, you know, it's kind of gone through this, everything is kind of decohered into this macro world, and, you know, we can't really affect it. That's also becoming even harder to, you know, to hide behind. And my most recent video, The Measurement Problem, goes into that in a lot of ways. So, I mean, I have seen so many people try to escape these arguments, and they always they're always using these same cookie cutter lines they get from maybe this blog they found somewhere. And the more you start to look at the science, the more you start to go into you can't escape it anymore. It's you know, it reminds me of that one song, you know, there's nowhere to run to, baby. Yeah, I completely agree. It just, you know, I hate to say it, but sometimes when I'm debating young Earth creationists and when I'm debating materialists, I see the same arguments come up. Just switch out biology with cosmology, and you'll get the same line. You'll just get people trying to explain away the data any way they can, just to hold to their beliefs. And I'm just like, sure, you can explain away any amount of data you want. You know, young Earth creationists may be right. Maybe there's a cosmic demon hiding fossils in the ground to fool us. That's a possibility, sure. But is it logical? Is it the best explanation? Not in the slightest. You know, if you're just going to keep explaining away the data, you're not being scientific. You're holding to the metaphysical prejudice.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, IP, sparring, thanks a lot. Very, very good discussion you and I just had. Would you to plug your YouTube channel?
Sure, you can come follow me on Inspiring Philosophy on YouTube, Facebook.com/Inspiring Philosophy. That's where I'm at. I'm hopefully going to be launching a website soon if I have the time to complete building it. So hopefully I can get that done. That should be done by October. But.
Solid. Guys, I have links below. His YouTube channel. His are very good. I think I shared one about a few months ago. Very entertaining stuff. And for audience, if they're listening, I'll go ahead and plug off. Just guys, YouTube.com. Just type in red pill. You'll see my channel pop up there. I'm on Twitter at pill tweets. And I think that's it. Anything to add?
No, it's great. Thanks for having me. I really enjoy conversations like this.
Buddy, it was fantastic, and yeah. I hope this plans. I think materialism really is pretty much total nonsense. And guys, if you're watching, you have any questions, don't hesitate to leave them, and I'll definitely get back to you. Mike, thanks a lot, man. Take care.
Take care.
Okay.